Hello everyone. Welcome to this guide on Octopath COTC Resources and Team Building 101. I'm testing this new avatar, so it would be nice if you'd leave a comment if you think this is fine, or if it would be better just without anything. Without further ado, let's jump right into the agenda for this. In this presentation, we're going to talk about managing Rubies, other limited resources, farmable resources, some basics of team building, and some examples explaining why teams are built the way they are for those bosses. We've been having quite a few asks about those on Discord, and I felt it would be nice to have a single video to try and explain these things for probably newer players. So let's jump into it. Let's talk a little bit about resources. Some of them are limited, some of them you can farm, so theoretically they are unlimited. The most important resource are the rubies. You should only use rubies for pulls. Don't use them for continues or tower tickets or anything that can't guarantee you a new character. This is the most valuable resource in game. On top of that, you should only pull for a new unit if you can guarantee the character. And this means that you should have a 4.5k stash for memory travelers and a 6k stash for collaboration units or limiteds or units that require 200 pulls to get enough fragments to guarantee the unit. And the reason for that is that the PT is a mechanism that reduces variance. So you really don't want to spend, let's say, 3k rubies on a unit and come out empty-handed. This is like very disappointing and people quit because of that. So I recommend you take this advice. On average, it will take 2,000 units. It would be the expected cost of a new memory traveler. But if you're able to stash the 4.5k, then you can guarantee that no matter how bad your luck is, you will have a good roster. And in general, let's say you get a new character. So you're pulling on a banner. When to know that you should keep pulling? Well, as a rule of thumb, it would take 83 more pulls to get a new character. So that's 1 divided by 1.2%, which is the probability of pulling a featured character on its banner. So as a rule of thumb, you need 100 and you need 200 pulls for a character, and you went all the way to 140. So you probably, if there's a character, a good memory traveler that you don't have, then you should consider spending the 60 pulls to get that traveler. By the way, I'm assuming light spenders. If you're gonna pull, if you don't care about how much you're gonna spend, then these rules generally don't apply. And I find the Grand Explorer's Pass quite good value, considering the amount of rubies that you get and some of the in-game perks like the extra slots for teams. Let's move on to some time-gated resources. So these resources are limited. So Awakening Stones, you can't get as many of them as you want. They are related to pulling duplicates of characters. In NetEase, you can get a character, an Awakening Stone. You can exchange for it. It's a 6-for-1 exchange, so it's not very good, but you can get them 3 months after a character release. And probably the best use for those are game-breaking gacha A4s. So you probably want to bump your Bargello to A4 because of the 100,000 damage limit up accessory, or powerful ultimate level 10s like Solon, or maybe you want to get A1 for damage dealers. So those are common uses for Awakening Stones. I forgot to put here, and probably very important, you want to save the Awakening Stones for pets, for powerful pets as well. So coming up, we're going to have the Chomper, and it's a really good pet, so you may want to save 3,000 Awakening Shards for them. Another time-gated resource are gold, silver, and bronze guide stones from hunts. So they are limited, but in time you're probably going to get plenty of them. So there's no need to worry too much. Just bear in mind that those are limited. The ultimate orbs are limited too, and I'm going to link this presentation, and there are some videos explaining these topics in more detail if you want to take a look at that. Light crystals for TP abilities and stats are also limited. Fortune tickets for job, you can get them from job towers, and you can get them weekly from memory and historic fragments, and those give you the medals that you can exchange for fortune weapons. These are limited, but in time you're gonna have way more of them than you can handle. Same thing goes for conviction tickets, and those are used to level up Serenoa. Let's quickly jump through farmable resources. Those are theoretically unlimited, which means that you should never trade rubies for experience, leaves, or memory shards or souls, or limited resources. You get to farm them. For example, you get to farm experience from Auguste or from Hellcates, and you can farm as many leaves as you want, and you can use those leaves to buy memory shards. So if you just go to the Nameless Town Tavern, you can get as many of them as you need. And the same thing goes for souls. You can farm as many of them in the hell towns. So there's no need to waste limited resources on farmable resources. So that's part one. Let's jump into team building. So if you have a new roster, maybe not a developed roster, people use a unit that you never seem to have, like Canary or Solon. How should you go about building a team to defeat bosses? Well, some general considerations is for general content, you don't really need to worry very much. Any team with some five-star character will probably beat the content as long as you have gear that's compatible with the boss. For late game, you're going to need specialized teams, but probably early in the game is not the time to worry about that. You may need to work around gimmicks, like Tikilan, the arena champion, has a critical phase in which only critical hits deal damage and shave shields. The Barricane level 100 NPC has a no switch gimmick, Empress Statlock has a charm, Hemi has her traps, and some bosses have rotating weaknesses. So you may want to consider these gimmicks, but that comes from building kind of a all-round team. So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about some tips for general teams. Some units, I'm going to start with S plus tier. Some units are just that good that you probably want to bring them to any generic team. And you're definitely going to want to bring one of Primrose EX or Renew because of their party-wide regeneration. In the case of Primrose EX, so she has an all buff, all debuff utility. She helps to charge Solon's ultimate. It's She's by far the best Gen pool character, and she's really coming to every general team. And Renew, she has a one move, give your team godlike mode in a lot of defense and a lot of heal. So she's a very good choice for healing. So you don't really have to worry about healing if you have Renew. Another or Some other very good characters for any generic team really are Hanet EX because she's a dodge tank and she buffs and debuffs and she has a great roll compression and also kills, and good luck killing him. He can buff and debuff a lot. And Canary is just a ridiculous shield shaver. She can shave 9 shields on her own. Now for the healer role. So these are general, very useful units. But for the healer role, you generally want only one healer on your team. And that's because party-wide regen casters exist. Like Primrose EX, Ogan, and Renew are prime examples. They can cast regeneration that lasts for many turns, depending on the boost level. You're always going to want to max boost them. And you can basically forget about healing for 5 turns. Or in case of Renew, probably for the entire fight. If you don't have any of these, then the next consideration would be front row regen and units that have +1 duration to it. So those would be Alfin, Ophelia, Moroso, for example. And the reason is if you max boost Alfin's heal, it lasts for 6 turns. Now there's the problem of you need to recast the heal if there's a unit that needs healing but didn't catch the front row heal from Alfin. And then the +1 duration comes in very handy for that one. If you don't have any of the previous characters, you may want to consider a BP extendable front row regen, and those are most apothecaries. Many apothecaries have that. Soleil would go into the +1 duration, but Theo, without his buff. Um, and the last choice are heal plus 2 turn regen, like Stead, or if you don't have anything, you just started the game, you probably want to use Mano or Cedric. 4 stars, you get to promote them to 5 stars anyways. And I don't think it's a good idea to use burst heal unless you have to deal with a very specific situation in which you need a mid a healing mid turn. So like the boss attacks twice, and the first attack is very powerful that is so powerful that you need some healing in between attacks. But other than that, regeneration is the way to go. Let's talk a little bit about offensive and debuff role. Generally, you want to pair that with the healer, since the healer won't deal too much damage anyways. So generally, you're looking for units that have party synergy. Like Signa, basically Signa synergizes with anything because she just debuffs everything. She's that good. Richard for sword teams or sword, pierce, light, dark, whatever, and Bargello. Some units have debuff synergy. Like Signa and Richard and Nefty and Bargello, they can debuff their elements. Signa can debuff anything again. Richard can debuff sword, Nefty can debuff axe, Bargello can debuff um, um, dagger. You're also looking for ultimate buffs or debuffs. I think I already mentioned Signa and Richard, right? They are really good. And then we have kilns Isla, Billy, and Pia. That's 3-star Billy and 4-star Pia. They're really good. And bear in mind that rare units are the ones that have elemental or weapon damage up. You can get active physical attack and active elemental attack which means units that buff physical attack with a spell or buff elemental attack with a spell. There are many units that do it. So those units, these skills, if a skill only buffs physical and elemental attack, nowadays it's not that valuable anymore. Now on the damage roll, for a general team, not a specialized team, in my opinion, a good idea is to use units that hit many weaknesses. For late game content, you need a specialized team, anyways. But the likes of Cyrus, he can hit 3 elements and a fourth for shield shaving with Tome. Cecily can hit 3 weapons. Hanit, Zanta, and Tatlock, they can also hit 3 weapons. So that's bow for Hanit and Zanta, plus whatever their pets hit. And same for Tatlock, Fen, and Wind, and whatever her pet hits. So these are good choices for the damage roll in a general team. Another important thing is when it comes to the damage dealer, you generally want the damage dealer to stay in the front row at all times. And that means that the unit paired with the damage dealer is one that will buff or improve the damage in some way. So we have Luchetta and Mabel, and they are like ultimate late game because they can extend, they are the only way in the game that to extend pet buffs. So if you have pets that buff damage or guarantee critical, with Luchetta and Mebo, you can get that to last for 2 turns, so you can stack pet buffs. Eliza and Xenia are really good because they give 20 and 30% passive elemental attack up. It's not so easy to get, and you don't usually or you don't always want to use an accessory to give this type of buff. Or maybe you have units like Isla that increase the buff cap. When you're dealing with sword or sword pierce anything, Sigrid is really good, and Laura is also really good. Laura debuffs elemental and Sigrid debuffs sword. So with Kurtz's A4, for example, you get to break with an extendable accessory and make the debuff last for a long time, the passive debuff. And then there are other backpacks. So Richard and Bargello, they give 15% passive physical attack up, and Bargello also gives 15% elemental attack up. So they are really good for physical teams, even when they're not hitting the weaknesses. Of course, nowadays we have more units that are specialized and give those buffs, but Richard and Bargello are just really good. And then the budget versions are the A4s. The Wingate gives 20% damage up, so it doesn't work, for example, with Sophia because she already has 30% ice damage up. But it would work, for example, to cap Cyrus to 30%, or to buff a hunter that doesn't have weapon damage up. Could be Hanit, for example. Um, and then there's Barad, and Barad gives a temporary physical attack buff, and that in the old days, let's call it like that, you'd extend that with Lynette because her passive extends Barad buff. And then Sarissa gives a flat 15% physical attack, passive physical attack, to the unit in the front row. So these are units that usually go paired with the damage dealer. For difficult content, you may want to bring units with a mitigation role. And so what I'm talking about here are tanks. So they are ideal when the boss only uses single target nukes, and Fiore EX simply absorbs and takes 0 damage from physical or elemental, so she's like the epitome of the single target tank. And you should also use passive defense items, and these are items that provide passive defense. In the case of Miles A4 to elemental attacks, Devin A4 to physical attacks, and Hammy A4 both to the front row unit. So this is, you want to equip those items in the tanks or in the units behind them. You should also use defensive buffs and debuffs, and the idea here is that uh, strong bosses will usually use area of effect attacks that hit all 4 units in the front row. So you want to bring, if that's the case, the way to go would be defensive buffs and debuffs. So Hanity X and Kills, as I mentioned before, are the ultimate units to tank and apply debuffs. And bear in mind, I'm not going to the math here, but stacking mitigation is really it's really powerful. So you can get multiple defensive buffs and defensive debuffs, and they really stack a lot. So if you get 30% mitigation or 30% attack debuff and 30% defense debuff, the effect is very powerful. Now let's get into some team compositions. So this is one of this is a rather old clear of Gertrude. She's weak to fire. So what you can see here are some characters and the role that they are playing in the team composition. So if you are ever asking yourself how many healers do you want, how much mitigation do you need, in general, the ratio of offensive characters to defensive characters, you get one healer and a few damage mitigation characters that also do other things. For example, Viola has offensive and defensive spells. But really, unless you want to turtle a fight and stay there playing for 100 turns, 1 hour, you're generally going to want a few mitigation characters, one healer, and a lot of offensive buffs. So Lynette, she kind of has fallen off nowadays, but she has many, many offensive buffs, including her ultimate. Eliza here, the reason she's here is to provide Cyrus with the 20% elemental attack buff. Mabel here, the idea here, this was a limited roster, so I needed to match the roster with a unit that could extend buffs, but also cast some magic buffs to apply to Cyrus and Molu here in this firefight. So we have one healer in Alphen, one buff unit in Lynette, 3 damage units, and Alphen has the pomegranate to restore BP, so he brings some utility here too, and a lot of units to provide different types of offensive buffs and debuffs. So generally, so the reason here is that you only need mitigation, enough mitigation to survive. But in the case of offensive buffs and debuffs, what you want is to cap every type of buff and every type of debuff. So it's really common to have multiple units just to cap all the different types of buffs and debuffs that I'm not going to detail here. Let's take a look at another fight. And this is a fight that in the beginning we didn't have many ways to deal with Yanlong. He had way too much HP to die in one break, so you really had to go all in. So everything you see here are damage units and offensive buffs. So you see Barad and 3-star Evelyn here. What they do is they provide passive physical attack up. And in the old days, we'd use Lynette swapping with the Brave Fen to extend that debuff. Oh, sorry, to extend that buff to the front row. The same thing goes to Fiora. She has her own physical attack buff. So this is kind of an all-in team, no healing, and the idea is to finish the fight as quickly as possible. Now, if you take a look at the Flames Grace level 100 NPC, so what you can see here, so this is 3-star Billy. In this fight, we use Alfin for some healing. Um, this was before we could one break, doing the break on turn 3. And we bring here Wingate. So like I mentioned, Wingate gives 20% damage up, which in the case of Therion gives him 20% dagger, passive dagger damage up, which is really good, because at the time we didn't have good dagger damage up items. So we have 3 units on the damage roll. We have Alvin for the healing, and Tressa here. At the time we didn't have any way to survive the nukes from the NPC, so Tressa would use her sidestep to dodge the nuke, and then use her wind skill to help shave some shields. So that's the idea. You see, there's one healer, 3 damage dealers, and then buffing, offensive debuffs, and Tressa on the mitigation roll. So that's what a team looks like. Let's give another example. This is another level 100 NPC, and so the idea here is to survive. And so Aleoni here, she hits light and does the healing. The village chief is weak to light. So we have Aleoni compressing 2 roles here. One is dealing light damage and shaving shields, but the other is to do the healing. So that was pretty convenient. We also have Varkin and Odette capping the light defense down. We have Primrose and Lynette with their buffs helping with the offensive buffing. We have Molu here, and her presence here is justified just to use her dodge and eat the nuke from the NPC. And then we have damage dealers here. All right, let's jump to Yanlong EX3. So that's a very, very difficult fight in the sense that Yanlong EX3 deals a lot of damage and there is no good way at the moment to one break him. So we use damage mitigation with Fiore EX and we put her on physical defense every turn. So Yanlong deals 0 physical damage because he doesn't have a physical AoE attack that he uses. So this is easy mode with Fury X and difficult mode without her. And then there's Renew, because Yanlong does use some AoE spells. So she really increases the defense and helps the team to survive. And the rest is just damage, damage, damage. You see that Nefty here is present to deal with the crows when Yanlong gets to summon them. I didn't put any characterization here in Aloni EX because she's basically feeding BP the whole time. So we see that a lot of damage comes from Richard, damage to the crows comes from Nefty, and then we have Lars here, and also Sazantos dealing damage to Yanlong. Even in a difficult fight like this, you see that there's only one healer, and not so much mitigation. Of course, a lot of it comes from the fact that Fiora is just too good to tank single target nukes. Let's take a look at this one, and this has a more developed roster. So what you see here is that Kilns is really good. He does damage, he has offensive buffs, and he does a lot of work in terms of damage mitigation because he has self-taught when in the front row, and he has a bunch of defensive capabilities in terms of debuffs. So this is one of the things that makes Kiln such a good character. You see Luchetta here, and the reason she's here is that she's going to extend the duration of buffs applied to Zata. And what you also see here, and it's something that a lot of players use, if you have Solon with a level 10 ultimate, that means he can cast his ultimate twice. So what you'll do is you buff Zanta in this case, or whatever the DPS, the damage dealer is, with a pet on the first break turn. Because of Luchetta, it's going to last for 2 turns, so he's going to hit very hard. And then you use Solon to amplify his damage, multiply by 2, and this is why I put Solon in a damage role. Even though he's not dealing the damage directly, he's effectively doubling the damage of your best damage dealer. And the role of Primrose EX is her ultimate gets to charge Solon's ultimate back to 50%. So on the second break turn, what you do is you're going to use Solon's pet to fill up the gauge, and then ult again, and again double the damage that in this case Zanta will deal, but well, whichever unit is the damage dealer. And these things that you're saying, you can basically look for any EX3 clear and you'll see this in action. And another example, and this is kind of a the ultimate late game composition. So what you see here is we have 2 damage dealers, literally 2 units that deal measurable damage to the boss. And that would be Detraina, because the boss is weak to light and dark, and Solon, because he doubles the damage that Detraina will deal. And all of the other units, the function of all of them is to either survive. In the case of Renew, she's doing some healing here, and Honeyed EX is tanking the single target nukes because the boss can hit quite hard. But everything else is dedicated to debuffing all of the varieties of debuffs, active, passive, everything that the boss can do. I should probably have put a an orange circle here because the trainer can self buff and she can also debuff the boss. So I should have put the orange circle here around the trainer as well. And I hope you all liked it. Again, this is far from being a comprehensive guide, but I think it can give a good notion of how to build a generic team and what happens when you get to the point where you need to customize rosters a lot. Thank you, everyone.